Hello, Ian here with another demo, this time to show you how I created the ice spell from our magic sound effects pack. Right, let's take a listen to the spell. So as you can hear, there's a few different elements. You've got the sound of like ice shattering, you've got the sound of like wind howling as well. I'm going to talk you through each of these elements, and let's start with the high sounds. Okay, so there's a few different things going on there, so I'll talk you through them one by one. First we have this ice cracking sound. This is probably the most important sound in the entire spell, because this ice sound is really the fundamental sound around which everything else is built. It was really important to me that I found a good sample for this, and I was really lucky to find this one. It's a really detailed sound of someone, I think, attacking some ice with a pickaxe or something. You get a really, really strong impact, but you also get lots of detail as the sound fades out, which is really vital because you want this to be as clear as possible. And sometimes with these high-pitched sounds, they can be quite piercing. This doesn't feel piercing to me, it just feels quite strong. So I actually did a little bit of audio editing just to make the sound finish a little bit quicker. So I just kind of took the ending and squashed it in, and then cross-faded it with the earlier sound. And also for the build-up, the fade-in, I've automated the volume to make it rise up. But this wasn't actually here before. What I've done is I've taken the sound and I've reversed it. And in Cubase, the way you do that, you would go to Audio Processes, Reverse, and then either click Continue or New Version. And then this kind of creates a really interesting sound. Let's listen to that again. So a reverse sound, because you're reversing it, you don't really get any tail onto any of the sounds. They all kind of like do these little mini build-ups, like they build up and then disappear. And loads of these, one after the other, in a really detailed sample like this, makes a really, really nice sound, really, really quick sound that sounds like something building on energy, especially if you automate the volume with it. I really like this kind of sound because when you reverse sounds, they still kind of have an essence of what they used to be before, but they have an almost unnatural quality about them too, which is perfect for a magic spell. Okay, next up is this magic twinkle sound. So I wanted this sound just as a kind of nice thing on the top of the spell, a nice high-end kind of note ringing out. It's not too loud, so you don't get this overly tonal sound to the spell, but it's just something up there that kind of fits nicely. And for some reason, for me, this bell sound does kind of have an icy quality. I can't put my finger on what it is, but these bell sounds, I think, do sound nice as ice effects. Now, for the fade into this, I've actually taken the sound and reversed it again, and this time I've pitch shifted it so that it starts low and builds up, so then it meets the same pitch as the rest of the effect. And how I've done this is Audio Processes, Pitch Shift, go to the envelope function, keep the second half of it where it is, and move the first half down to the bottom. So then it rises up in pitch to the kind of standard pitch that the sample's at. And then you just choose the amount of semitones you want and whether you want the timing to stay the same or not. And that's how I got this sound. Again, I like these sounds of things rising in pitch and rising in volume because they work really nice to build to that moment of impact when the ice shatters. And finally we have these rising chime sounds. I've used these in quite a few of my magic spell effects. I really like this sound. It's the sound of some chimes, which I've used the same pitch shift function to make them rise from low pitched up to high pitched. Chimes are really, really useful for magic spell effects because they just have a magical quality to them. And by using this pitch shift function, you do get this kind of nice build up to that moment of impact. I've actually automated the volume here so you get more of a kind of gradual fade in and then also kind of a gradual fade out. The fade out is also increased by the fact that I've used some delay here. The reason I've used this is just I like giving things a bit more of a magical quality. I want the sample to last a bit longer, and having that nice magical delay fade out really just sells the magic element of this sound, so it doesn't just sound like some ice cracking. So, onto the mid-range sounds. Okay, let's start with this Synth Rise sound. I love this sound because it doesn't really sound that much like a synth to me until the very end, and that final synthy sound, that's quite disguised under the sound of the ice shattering and stuff. If I could have cut that out because it doesn't really fit that much, but you don't really hear it underneath everything else. But I really like this because it sounds like wind to me. It sounds like wind that's kind of suddenly rushing up and rising. And I guess for me, I associate kind of ice with wind because generally I think of kind of like Arctic weather, which makes me think of like strong Arctic winds. And so I really liked the idea of this wind that built up to that moment of impact. And this sound is perfect for that. You have this nice rise up, which I've kind of helped with some volume automation. And then you have, the sudden kind of drop off after the moment of impact. I just really, really like that build. Okay, next up is the sound of this firework going off. I've actually combined two elements of the same sample here. I've combined the sound of the fireworks first going off with the actual explosion. Now, if you listen to this on its own, that's a really nice sound for kind of the start of the sound. And I've used this in a few different spells. This kind of the fireworks starting sound I really like. It just sounds to me like a magician waving their wand around. For this spell, I've combined it with this kind of explosion. Again, to kind of add to that windy kind of element, I've actually used some volume automation, so you don't hear the initial impact of the boom. Without it, without that volume automation, you get this kind of sound, which sounds more like an impact. And actually, if you go further back in the sample, you'll hear actually more of the actual boom. But I thought it was best to just kind of add a little bit of that, fade it in so that it doesn't have that initial attack. And then you do get this kind of nice windy fade out that kind of continues throughout the entirety of the spell. Yeah, I just liked this for the windy element, and it really helps to sell the power of the spell starting. Obviously, you don't want the spell starting to overpower the actual impact, but it's there strong enough to kind of give you a sense that there is some powerful person that's behind this magic spell. Okay, onto the low sounds. First, we have this magical whooshing sound. Now, I've actually used some delay here. The reason I like the sound is because it comes in at kind of like the moment of impact, the moment the ice cracks, and it's a very nice sudden build-up. Again, it's got that kind of windy quality, and that is aided by the use of this delay. Rather than using a normal delay, I've used a diffusion delay, which works a bit more like a reverb, but to me has a slightly different quality to it, a slightly more airy quality than a normal reverb would have. I've automated the volume just so that the fade out doesn't last too long, because if I don't have that, then sometimes they can go on a little bit too long. But this is nice just to add some kind of bassy rise up to that moment of impact, so that when it hits, you can tell that it's hit hard because it's had this sudden swell of sound just before. And finally, we have this low hit sound. I'm not sure if this is a drum or something synthy, but it's perfect because it just, it's just there as a to help with the impact, with the low pitched end of that impact. It doesn't really sound like an ice thing or anything like that. It's more of a generic sound that can just be used just to beef out the body of the sound, just so that moment of impact is stronger than it would have been without this low pitched sound. Now, you might notice, if you've listened to some of the other tutorials, this spell is actually quite simple. There's not that many layers to it, and it just goes to show that you don't really need to have like dozens and dozens and dozens of tracks. Sometimes for certain spells you need loads of tracks just to kind of get a certain sound, but there's probably only about 10 or 11 different tracks here, and they all combine together to make this sound. Hope this was useful for you. Thanks for listening.